Do you ever wonder why it feels so good to watch the world fall apart? How we got so good at destroying things? How the Rampage began? Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see here, where was it? Oh, here we go, 1986. Oh, obviously, I should have known with
Авария на Чернобыльской.
And
Challenger that has exploded in midair.
that's not what we're here for, though. Okay, let's see. Surely you gotta be here somewhere. There you are. You might have heard the name Rampage before, whether it be here, or here. Hopefully not here, but this Rampage was different. Well, actually, it really wasn't. Over time, there wasn't much iteration to the gameplay, but that didn't matter. Because what was different about the first game was the shockwave it created that still echoes out to this day. Now, unlike a lot of arcade cabinets in the 80s, Rampage wasn't here to waste your time. It didn't want to be like every other cabinet in the arcade. You weren't there to set a new high score or reach some arbitrary objective. You were there to do one simple thing: cause destruction. And boom! That right there. That's what we're here for. This 16-bit skyscraper being torn to the ground, covered up with a silly dust cloud that was used because the skyscraper falling animation would glitch out where it interacted with the ground. But in all its wonkiness and glory, this is where the story begins. Later this year, the NES releases, bringing gaming back to where it's meant to be all along. In our homes, with the lights turned off and no strangers around to hog all the games that would continue to add bits and pieces of destruction in the years to come. But the potential of what could be always felt underutilized due to the lack of power of consoles at the time. So let's jump forward a bit. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, this might just take a second to warm up. While we wait, I guess I can talk a little bit about what we're skipping past. In this in-between period, as consoles and computers started becoming more powerful, naturally, so did the capabilities of destruction. In SimCity, it played as a funny mechanic, seeing entire parts of your city being torn apart by natural disasters. And then you had worms, where it was basically a core mechanic of the game. You could tunnel through the levels, or destroy the environment when you exploded on your friend's skin-colored worms. Oh, anyways, on that note, we are ready to go. The PlayStation 2. Should have been called the Slay Station because all the puss you were guaranteed to slay after owning one of these. At least that's what I'm reading here on all the forums from back then. Regardless, this era holds a game that is very near and dear to my heart. War of the Monsters. I first found this beauty a few years after it released in my local Blockbuster, which for everyone else was the Game Pass of yesteryear. And Blockbuster, if you're out there listening, I miss you, baby. But back to the other love of my life. It featured kaiju-esque monsters as the playable characters, and its gameplay largely revolved around cities or other large environments being destroyed. But it swapped out the 2D vision for a fully 3D destructible environment, and on top of that, instead of working with your friends, you would finally get to kill each other. Plus, now as buildings crumbled, you could interact with the pieces of collapsed rubble and use them as weapons. For example, this telephone antenna here can be used to BAM! Right through his fucking chest! The only next logical step is making it the entire game. Now, the original Red Faction, which released in 2001, started sampling with this kind of destruction, but it was just a taste of what was to come. It took place in the underground environment of Mars, filled with long, rocky corridors and industrial military outposts. And while the graphics were wonky and the story barely existent, what people came and stayed for was the Geomod engine. The initial release allowed you to modify most of the terrain and buildings you ran into, which was a huge leap forward at the time. But what it was doing more than anything was walking so the next game could run. Oh, sick. This thing is still warmed up, so we shouldn't have any issues getting to 2009. While we're on the way, though, I just wanted to mention we're missing Brian Collin, one of the original creators of Rampage, getting inducted into the White Castle Hall of Fame. That's the one thing I love about you guys, your insistence on marrying video games with insanely unhealthy foods. It's a beautiful thing, really. Okay, we're here. 2009 smells so much different than 2003. Is that normal? Let me get my bearings on what's been happening around here. Wait, what? This can't be right. My records were showing that in 2009 was quite a year for the man named Thomas Hanks. Apparently he started the year by landing a plane in a river, and that was a good thing for some reason? And then somehow later on that year, he was also allowed to captain a ship that was taken over by pirates. A word of advice, I think you guys need to stop letting Thomas Hanks pilot your vessels. Anyways, back to destruction. So, more importantly than planes and boats are buildings. And you know who hates buildings more than Thomas hates properly operating vehicles? Red Faction Guerrilla. And how do I know this, you might ask? Well, that one's easy. While destroying the ground and caves were no longer implemented in the game, basically everything else became a fully destructible environment in a new fleshed-out physics-based Geomod 2.0. And this was the catalyst, the example of what was possible, and people loved it. Ironically enough, it was one of the only parts of the game that people liked. To quote Vice, Red Faction Guerrilla was a mediocre shooter with a god-awful story and largely dull missions, yet is almost universally loved. Why? It made blowing shit up in art form. Can't agree much more than that. Hell, self-describing your game as a shooter where the two most fun weapons to use are the sledgehammer and a black hole bomb is enough said, really. But none of that mattered because the players didn't need all that extra stuff. They just wanted to tear shit apart and get that same feeling of crumbling a skyscraper 20 years prior. But now, instead of dust covering the goods, we could see each individual piece in all its glory. Honestly, destruction in video games is a great metaphor for what makes video games different as an art form. While it's able to occupy the same avenues that allow movies or TV shows or books to thrive, it creates a brand new avenue that only itself can occupy, and that's the art of gameplay. And that's what these types of games are, the epitome of gameplay. While the graphics might suck or the story isn't interesting, it doesn't matter if it feels fun. Like, look at Destiny. Now, I know some people might get all pitchforky on me for this, but Destiny isn't fun because of the story it tries and occasionally succeeds at telling. Destiny is good because it's made by Bungie, and Bungie knows how to make satisfying gunplay. Now, I'm not here saying games should completely shirk the idea of focusing on telling good stories, but what I am trying to say is too often now, games are shoehorned in to fit these predetermined checkboxes that are deemed good for retaining players. From battle passes to open worlds, these aren't automatic evils, but they are things when pushed on developers from outside sources. It takes away the innovation and freedom that can provide what gamers want, and that's a fun game to play. And from here, AAA game studios followed suit. Over the next couple years, you would see shooters of all kinds take their stab at destruction. Battlefield famously with their Levolution, to Rainbow Six Siege's amazing move combining procedural destruction with dynamic environment building allowing for an amazing tactical synergy, to the Finals who are attempting to create entirely destructible multiplayer matches with server-side destruction. All the way up to modern day now, where we now have the insane indie games like Teardown that allow for humongous voxel sandboxes where destruction truly becomes an art form. But while it's become more of a mainstay in modern video games, it wasn't an easy journey for it to happen. In this interview with Brian Collin, he talks about how the higher-ups at the time didn't really support his idea. But that mindset of the corporate entity stifling the peoples whose job it is to create has also been just as equally a mainstay in the industry. So I guess this is a PSA of sorts, saying, hey, let people try new shit. That's how you get new amazing things. You can either keep riding the waves of others that are better than you, or you can try for once to make the waves yourself. Regardless, it's really cool seeing how far we've come in such a long time. What started as pixel skyscrapers being torn up by pixelated Harambes are now fully realized environments where entire worlds are able to be bent to our will. Feels different watching the skyscraper come down now.